Ford and GM's $302 billion debt crisis. Bankrupt soon. Hello everybody and welcome back to Business Guide. Introduction. Ford and GM have long been standing players in the automobile market. They have revolutionized vehicles in the 1900s under powerful leaders like Henry Ford and Alfred Sloane Jr. Stylish annual model changes and cars themselves have all been invented under Ford and GM. Yet under the management of risk-averse COEs, the review's technical radical change Ford and GM may very well go bankrupt as little as the next year. Many investors buy Ford and GM for their high dividend yield, but the high yield has been unable to prevent the stock's free fall. This may be because investors know Ford's dividend is unsustainable, and a dividend cut is right around the corner. A subprime loan crisis, combined with an auto industry recession, can trigger a steep dividend cut. US car sales have witnessed no growth over the last few years. For 2019, sales topped 17 million units, but still edged lower compared to 2018. Billions of debt that both Ford and GM have. Whether companies will go bankrupt and when. Ford's finances. Before we get into the finances, it's important to understand that this is actually a huge deal. Ford and GM have piled up so much debt that their bankruptcies would shake the stock and bond market by a substantial amount. Forbes journalist Jesse Colombo has stated that Ford and GM going bankrupt could create a quote-unquote downward spiral. Now, out of both Ford and GM, Ford has a far worse balance sheet. Ford's total current debt stands at $175.7 billion, which when put into perspective is greater than the GDP of Sri Lanka, Serbia and Iceland combined together. Ford could literally pay each and every one of his employees $921,000 right now if it had as much cash as Dept. Not only that put but Ford owns $30 billion worth of cash and cash equivalents, leaving Ford's net debt to be a whopping $144 billion. Ford going bankrupt is not just an old company dying off. If Ford went bankrupt right now, each adult in the US would have to pay $689 just to pay off Ford's debt. That's right, if tax money were evenly distributed, you would have to give the government almost $700 right now if Ford went bankrupt. Not only that, but Ford's margins have been sliding tremendously. Even before the pandemic in the fourth quarter of 2019, for US margin dropped some 8.8% to 2.8%, and its margin in China drops to minus 21.5%. These losses have worsened even more in the first quarter of 2020. Ford lost $2 billion, and surprisingly, Ford was able to turn a $1 billion profit in the second quarter despite revenue being down 53% year over year. However, don't be fooled because Ford has some talented accountants at hand. For example, one question to ask is, what do you consider a profit? Because a GAAP profit does not include loan interest, according to Guru Focus. Ford is paying on average 1.05% interest per year on its $175.7 billion of debt, which totals to an amount of $2.6 billion a year. In addition, Ford's delayed $450 million worth of interest in the second quarter of 2020 to the next quarter, which just exposes the short-term accounting magic going on at Ford. Now that we know that Ford is in big trouble, we can quickly skim through GM's finances and see the desperation going on. Disaster of GM. GM recently struck a deal with the fraud that is Nikola Motors, which truly shows how desperate the automaker is. Now, it is not to be taken in a wrong way. GM's side of the deal makes sense. Trevor Milton agreed to give away $2 billion worth of stock just so that Nikola could get the right to buy GM's battery and hydrogen fuel cells. Yet, to associate your company with a fraud shows how desperate the automaker, and more specifically, the GM CEO Mary Barra is. GM has $127 billion worth of total debt and $98 billion worth of net debt. The automaker is also burning through money despite having talented accountants like Ford. In the second quarter of 2020, GM lost $758 million, which isn't as much as Ford, but still a loss nonetheless. Ford and GM's debt pile is stacking up. With the levels of debt that Ford and GM have, it's not a question of if Ford and GM will go bankrupt, but rather it's a question of when. Both automakers are piling on debt every single quarter, and it's no secret that this debt bubble will eventually have to pop. In the past 6 months, Ford has added $19 billion of debt, and GM has added $23 billion of debt. Given the existing debt pile, it is no surprise that this debt is at extremely high interest. Ford's credit rating recently got downgraded to junk status, which literally means that their bonds are junk. If you buy Ford bonds, chances are that you never see that money ever again. Ford's first series of bonds were over $3.5 billion and had an interest rate of 8.5% per year. As one can guess, GM is in the same situation, as the automaker also got downgraded to junk and ended up selling $4 billion worth of bond at an interest rate of 6.25% per year. This clue not only points to Ford and GM's terrible finances, but also their upcoming bankruptcies. Clearly, the US auto market is in terrible shape. Lenient lending practices have kicked the can further further down the road, but that won't last forever. In addition, the situation in China, which is another key market for auto manufacturers, is dire. To contain the spread of coronavirus, hundreds of millions of people in China have been living under some form of quarantine. Ford and GM's slow electrification, the last straw. Ford and GM's reluctance to go all in into the electric vehicles is leading to serious issues. Internal combustion engines are great. They've helped fuel the global economy and improve transportation all around the world. However, they have reached a point of slowing innovation. On the other hand, electric vehicles are becoming better and better with the improvement of thermal regulations of batteries and increasing battery energy density. Out of both Ford and GM, the first bankruptcy is likely going to be Ford. Ford has had an awful DNA within its management. They have built a team of managers who have been refused to accept change. Let us take a look at an interview with Ford's former CEO, Mark Fields, who was fired 1 year after this interview. Mark quoted, "We take all of our competitors very seriously. When you actually look at the level of competition that we have in the industry from our traditional competitors to today's competitors, the non-traditional ones, we are embracing them. It is extremely exciting for us. We are not looking as it is a threat." He also says that he disagrees with Elon having an upper hand lately. What Elon has done is great. Tesla is pretty amazing, and the biggest profit that he has brought to the market just raised awareness of electrified vehicles. Now up to date, this company has catered to a very affluent consumer, but our approach is to present the largest selections of electrified vehicles, conventional hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and battery electric vehicles. As we said, we are number 2 seller in the US in electrified, number 1 plug-in hybrids. We have a lot of experience here. This is a man that has built a management team at Ford, a lot of experience here. He's not scared of the competition in the electric vehicle space and refuses to admit that Tesla has a lead in space. Given that one can probably guess that Ford's new CEO Jim Hackett has had a horrible time opening the company, he's arguably even worse than Mark, as he went on a CNN interview to state that Elon is competing with Henry Ford, not himself. Hackett quoted, "Tesla might be the criteria what we talked at the beginning, but as a disruptor is coming, it's balance. I happen to compete with a rocket scientist who is really smart. I respect that about him, and he's competing with the ultimate disruptor in Henry Ford. To claim that Elon is competing with Henry Ford is quite ridiculous, and is not to be said to disrespect Henry Ford. Jim is using Henry as a competitor of Musk in order for him to set the blame away from him. Hackett is 65 years old and has enough money to retire. He's simply just collecting his annual salary of $17.5 million until he gets fired. When it comes to GM, the story is the same as GM CEO Mary Barra has constantly emphasized electric cars are the future, yet her actions don't meet up with her words. GM has this huge EV line coming up soon, but what are the specs? How much will they cost? With such low electrification, it's just a matter of time before both GM and Ford go bankrupt." Tesla Cybertruck, the end of Ford and GM. Ultimately, the turning point for both Ford and GM are when the Tesla Cybertruck is officially in production. Ford's prize vehicle, the F-150, is Ford's most profitable vehicle, and if Tesla is able to secure that with just 5% of the market share, this would hurt for its profitability sustainability. This is no different for GM, as in 2018, GM revealed that the automaker makes $17,000 in pre-tax profit for every full-size pickup truck sold, with over $150,000 pre-orders. The Tesla Cybertruck is bound to steal some of the profits from legacy auto, which could leave Ford and GM lagging on the loan interest payments and sooner or later leaving both automakers going bankrupt. The Cybertruck is expected to go into production late 2021, so this could leave Ford and GM bankrupt by 2020 to 2023.